I'm very excited here to have our second speaker here. And Darren Atterbury is the city manager here from Fort Collins. And I'll say a few things here about Darren in a couple of minutes here. But, this is part of our Envision Littleton process. As you know, the council here this past fall adopted a vision statement. This is the first one we've done. We went through a very extensive process here to get community input. We had thousands of people participate in this process, and I think as a percentage of the city, it was quite a remarkable number. It certainly exceeded my expectations about the participation here for our vision statement. And so we do have 5 guiding principles here that we're going to be using into the next step of our process, which is our comprehensive plan. And as we've talked before, here in the community, we have a comprehensive plan, quite honestly, that dates back to the 1980s. And so we are long overdue here in providing a serious update to that. At the same time, we're also doing a transportation master plan. We've never done one of those before. So this is an opportunity for us to kind of look to the future. We have a vision. We have a series of guiding principles. We're looking to decide what is our future here when it comes to issues like growth, kind of our financial status. Are we going to manage all this, tie it to transportation? We're also going to be looking, no doubt, at issues like housing, economic development. And so this truly is our opportunity in our community for us to comprehensively take all these issues and move them forward. So our schedule here, the council's looking at trying to manage a process that looks at adopting a comprehensive plan here late this fall. Then along with us, of course, will be a transportation master plan. The next step after that is we're going to be building on the comprehensive plan itself, a series of elements like housing as an example. And then they're also going to be the next major piece of this thing is they're going to have to reconcile the code, our city code, against the comprehensive plan. And I think we've struggled as a community here for a long time just about our code and how it kind of manages growth and development. And so again, this is our opportunity to kind of put this all in alignment. So we've been taping these things, and so I would hope that this conversation that we're going to have here with Darren, we kind of spread that throughout the community. We're filming this. It's going to be on our Channel 8 as well as our YouTube channel. And so we'll have that up. In fact, our first speaker we have up now on our YouTube channel here. So again, we're trying to get the word out and kind of share these conversations. We're using kind of this speaker series. This is kind of a lecture format. This is an opportunity for us as the city to kind of bring in people and talk about kind of their experiences to kind of add to the process here that we've got for our Envision Littleton. All right, on a personal level, one of the things that when I came here and was asked to be the city manager that I thought was most important was for us as a community to have a conversation about our future. And to credit to the city council, this is their mission. And they have taken the first big step here in engaging our community to create this vision statement, a series of principles to guide us to the future. Politically, this is very difficult. And for us, we have a history here where we've struggled with trying to decide what is the long-term vision and how we're going to manage things like growth. And the council, again to their credit, has decided this is our number one goal. We had a retreat here back in January. They emphasized that again. We must get this comprehensive plan process completed. And so all the goals within the city, and certainly my marching orders as the city manager, the comprehensive plan, that is our number one goal here for our community. I've had kind of an interesting experience in my own career, and one of the reasons we asked Darren Atterbury to be here, he is the city manager for Fort Collins. I met Darren well over 20 years ago. Both he and I were participating with a group that was connected to local governments. It was about innovation, about sharing best management practices. And I think that had a real heavy influence on me personally about how I manage my own career, what I saw as kind of my mission for any city. And my hope was to bring that kind of experience here. And I look to Darren. He's got a reputation among city managers and elected officials that's just unparalleled. And I think Fort Collins itself is an amazing community. I consistently see that as kind of one of the best places to live in the entire country. And they've had an interesting challenge. And I think that I saw kind of an interesting connection between Fort Collins and Littleton. And we asked Darren Atterbury to come and share a little bit about his experience, Fort Collins' experience, and what we may take away from that as we approach our own comprehensive plan, transportation plan, and reconciling all of our codes. So with that, I think I would like to have Darren Atterbury come up and join us. Again, my impression of Darren is at the highest regard. I think that you'll find him very engaging, and his stories about and his experience about Fort Collins is going to be very useful to us here at Littleton. So let's welcome Darren Atterbury.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Your city manager and I, about 20 years ago, looked a lot younger, and we didn't have we didn't have as much gray hair. One of the things that I know we had then, and we still have, is this deep commitment to public service, and to not being about average. And so hopefully, and first of all, I just appreciate being here and being able to tell our story. I want to just say up front, Fort Collins' story is one story of many. And I've had the privilege of being able to be in local government in Fort Collins, in the Portland, Oregon area, in Atlanta, Georgia, and in the Bay Area. My wife and I grew up in Northern California. Hopefully that doesn't offend many of you. This is the part that will probably offend most of you. I grew up as an Oakland Raiders fan, and so I'll confess that now. I've been involved in city planning and civil engineering and city management my entire career after leaving college and graduate school. And I hope that after we get done here and you get released by 9 o'clock and we've had a dialogue, and I've got some things I want to present clearly, but hopefully you leave with maybe goosebumps about public service and about your community and about the importance of co-creating a community versus what I'll talk a little bit about versus, sort of the city dictating and mandating, but that one of the things that has really been amazing in my last 23 years in Fort Collins is this idea of co-creating a community. That bringing all the different voices in, that the city plays a really, really critical part in the future of the city of Fort Collins, but not the only part. And I'll confess, when I got out of grad school, I went to Georgia Tech in Atlanta and studied city planning and civil engineering. And when I got out of grad school, I thought, gosh, if they would just take all of my ideas and build this would be such a great place. And what I've realized is that that actually so many other people have great ideas too. And so the idea of bringing the ideas together, working through those ideas, I say playing with frogs, let's play with it a little bit. Let's see, some frogs are dead on arrival. Some have really, really great potential. Let's kind of play with those a little bit. And then let's consciously, in a very deliberate way, choose to move forward with those. So I've already jumped in a little bit. I want to say Terry, my colleague, is here. Terry Runyon. Her role at the city is, I would basically call her our director of excellence. That it's really, really trying. Terry is very, very good at helping the city clarify its vision. Trying to understand how to align resources to that vision, and then build systems and put systems in place that ensure that we're on track. And I'll elaborate on that kind of concept as I move forward. I don't have any notes here. I have a PowerPoint. I am not used to standing on a stage. I'm used to walking around, and so bear with me. I'm a little bit stiff right now, but I'll loosen up, and you'll probably think, oh my gosh, this guy's never going to stop. But we will finish on time, and I do want to set aside some time for just a dialogue. Your city manager emphasized the importance of your planning process, and one of the things I'd like you to make sure you leave with is that and Fort Collins deeply and fundamentally believes in the value of planning. That if you aren't visioning and aligning resources to that plan and being very intentional and very deliberate, then you're going to get what you get, and we would say you're probably going to get average. So I love the fact that that's the top priority for the city council and the manager and the staff, and I think that's really critical. Your town also is amazing, and I know Fort Collins has received a lot of accolades in the last 10, 15 years, and we're grateful for those. As Littleton, you've received a lot of accolades, fabulous accolades as well. And as you know, although sometimes people think we do it for those accolades, we don't. The trophy and the plaques are really kind of nice prizes along the way, but what you're trying to do is build an amazing community. And whether it's the core downtown that you have, which is a fabulous place where we had dinner, or getting up this morning and seeing the foothills and clear skies and having great access to transportation, on and on and on. Your city manager could easily be in other communities around this country talking about Littleton too, and so that's something that we have in common. That we both have great appreciation for being able to participate in these community building discussions. We don't take it lightly. I know your council members don't either. It's a lot of work, and for them, it's volunteer positions, and for board and commission members that are here too, you're co-creating this community. So I just want to say I certainly recognize that. So here's the Cliff Notes. This is kind of the big slide. If you don't want to hang out for the next hour with together, then this is probably some of the things that you want to pay attention to. And I have to admit, if you see a spelling error, I am so sorry. So Terry, no, it's not Terry. I want you to know that she helped she did the presentation, but I made some significant changes last night just based on my mood and based on what I wanted to share. And so I always, what I was telling your folks beforehand is that I know that because we have a local TV station, Channel 14 at the city, and I came in and I said, how about if I have a microphone, I can just walk around, and I know the TV folks are like, no, please don't do that. That's really, really makes our job hard. The other thing is, I know when I speak that our communications people are in the back, and this is not mine, but usually have a script, right? And about a slide into it, I go off script, and they say, here he goes. So I'm going off script. So I'm going off Terry's script a little bit. These are the things that I'm going to hit on real quickly, and then I'll go into a little bit more. We deeply and fundamentally believe in Fort Collins that you have to be very intentional about your vision. That if the city council is not clear about your vision, or whoever the community leaders are, then chances are everything's going to be a priority to you. So this idea of a big giant funnel being down to very clear, what is your vision? I'll talk more about ours. Ours is to provide world-class municipal services through operational excellence and a culture of innovation. So it used to be, this is interesting, it used to be we are passionate about creating a vibrant world-class community. There were two problems with that. Does the city really create? We co-create. We're a really critical part of it. And what part is that? It's the municipal services. And then also create a world-class community. Well, I'll confess, my wife and I were in Prague 2 weeks ago visiting our son who's studying overseas. And when I think about Prague and I think about Fort Collins, that world-class is confusing to people. But my wife said, I'll take Fort Collins because they have mountains. And Terry said, "Don't you dare say Fort Collins isn't world class." No, but I would say that. So my thing was I loved Florence, Italy, right? And I loved where I grew up in Sonoma County, California. Loved those places, and those felt to me like world class. But the words world class became really confusing to people. So we said, okay, how about the part that we can actually directly influence? Municipal services. So Fort Collins is a full-service city, water, wastewater, stormwater, electric. Our voters in November voted for us to build a municipal broadband utility, which is a big, big deal. I probably won't hit on here a lot, but every single property in Fort Collins within the next 36 months will have access to true gigabyte speed, fiber to every property, and it'll be a direct competitor with Comcast and CenturyLink. We took 4 years to study that. We did not do that lightly. We didn't predetermine the outcome to say we have to do it municipally. We just said, if we're talking about world-class municipal services, the current service that we have is inadequate. And the providers pretty much clearly said to us, we're gonna provide the kinds of services that we've always provided. And so our council and our community over a 3 to 4 year time frame said, no, we mean world class. And so now we're in that business. But parks and planning and all those sort of things. So this idea of vision clarity is really, really critical. If you don't have a vision, then I think everything becomes a priority for you. And then that means nothing becomes a priority. And by the way, the stuff that we're talking about, and I think if I can credibly stand up here and talk about this, this journey has really been over a 10 to 15 year process. These are not quick hit. This isn't the quick silver bullet, easy answer. This has really been a journey. Now, Fort Collins has had an amazing history that we inherited that I'll speak to in just a minute, but which we're trying to leverage. But the stuff we're talking about today isn't easy and isn't going to be in one mayoral term of office or a council term of office. It may not even be. Hopefully, it'll be one city manager over in the next. By the way, you have an amazing city manager. I just want to say that you have an amazing city manager. So that's So then if you're clear about your vision, then how do we align resources to that vision? And I'll talk a little bit about people. In our case, we've got a workforce of about 2,400 people at the city. We do 2-year budgeting, which is really, really important to help us longer term plan, about $1.4 billion. We've got a $100 million capital budget. We've got, same as you, we've got planning, and we've got those sorts of things. But just as we talk about aligning resources to that vision, just as important is what you stop doing. And you know, in local government in particular, there's a lot of pressure to do lots of things. But if you're clear about what you are, you're also going to be clear about what you are not and what others maybe do. And so that's, I think, really why that language about co-creation is so important. And now I'm speaking to sort of my city, city colleagues and council members and so forth. I think we're, as local governments, we've got to be very intentional about what we are not. And I think, for example, we've had some services, I know, as we've had this stop doing list conversation. What do we stop doing? There's things that we had been doing for 50 years that made total sense back then that it doesn't make sense now. And that's a really hard conversation, because you might even have people in your organization that their entire careers are built around that particular service. Or you might have stakeholders in your community that's you do away with that and I'm moving or closing my business or whatever. And that's very important. And then also this thing, I'm really fortunate in that, and this is crazy, but in the 23 years that I've been in Fort Collins, I've worked with 33 council members and 5 mayors. So our boards change. And we are, Fort Collins elects great people. They elect great mayors, and none of them are here, right? It is televised, so I got to say really nice things. But I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. Our relationship, the relationship between the community and our elected officials and our city staff has been remarkable. As I look back in our 140 plus year history, we've had no corruption. We've had civil discourse. We've had a deep commitment to going from here to here. It does not mean that Tuesday night at 6 o'clock are super easy. We have very difficult conversations, but that legacy of 140 plus years, 146 years, I think, has been pretty remarkable. And the reason why I said that is I've had 2 mayors of the 5 that have been, sort of PhDs in systems thinking. I had a mayor, Doug Hutchinson, who really helped with start up a lot of this journey, who was a Department of Defense, Air Force guy, strategic planner, and really felt that local government needed to play at a different level. And then I have a mayor now, Wade Troxel, who was just re-elected a couple weeks ago for his 3rd 2-year term, and he's a PhD in mechanical engineering at CSU, and he is a systems thinker. And so I would say that as a local government, that's really a critical part of who we are. This is just my key takeaways. So I got a lot of slides, and I'll talk about these, but I'm talking about them all right now. So maybe I'll be done in about 15 minutes, and we'll just have a conversation. Your inheritance, somewhere along the way, on my leadership journey, I realized that how about instead of saying we're fixing what they broke before us, how about somehow really acknowledge the work that was done before us and recognize that as an inheritance and how to build on that. And the tone changes because it's oftentimes that we come in, and leaders in particular in high energy and let's go leaders like myself, it's like let's come in and let's fix this, and I'm not saying that change isn't necessary. It absolutely is to get better, but let's recognize the amazing work that's been done before us. And now, unless Littleton has had a really tattered past, and maybe it's time to sort of totally deviate from that. But in our case, this idea, and really in my leadership journey, this idea of being cognizant of what I've inherited and what I've been able to, and one of the things I know is that this is the 65th year of the city celebrating our council manager form of government. I know that I'm the 9th city manager in the history of the city. I think it's important to know that. It's important to know your history. Why were these decisions made? And some of them you may not agree with, but how do we build on that, and how does that become part of our learning, our narrative? So I think that's some important language that we use. I'll talk a little bit about what's the one thing that Littleton believes that no one else believes, and I'll give a little more context about that in a second. This is a really important one. As you're going through your community comprehensive plan, you'll see on one of my slides, our city comp plan is what I call the mothership of all vision. It's in Fort Collins. It is the guiding, overarching document. In some communities, these comprehensive plans are pretty simply land use plans and infrastructure plans. In Fort Collins, we do a lot more than that. We talk about our cultural desires and goals. We address hard things like social equity and diversity, inclusion. We talk about, it's not just and again, I shared that, I'm a planner. Back in planning school in California, it was called a general plan. And it was really a land use plan and an infrastructure plan. Our mothership, our plan called City Plan, is much different than that. Because again, when you City Plan for us is the clarifying vision. Now we know we got to go after aligning resources to that system. So, but think big versus average. This can get me in trouble in a community like Fort Collins because growth matters a lot in both ways. We have people who want no growth, and we want people who want absolute free market. I would say that Fort Collins is really a managed growth community. And I think that, well, I'm not going to speculate on where Littleton is, but I know that this is it's an important dialogue in your community. When I say think big, I don't mean population. Fort Collins is a town of 177,000 people now. We know in the next 30 to 35 years, we're going to be 255,000 people. It's rapidly growing. And I know when I share that in a neighborhood meeting, most people really don't like that. And they don't like the traffic, and they don't like the lack of affordability. It's becoming less and less affordable. This is kind of a fun story. I shouldn't say on video, but I will say. When my wife and I moved from Portland, Oregon to Fort Collins about 23 years ago via Atlanta, via the San Francisco Bay Area, we got to Fort Collins, and at the time the city was probably about 110,000 people, maybe 120,000 people. And we would go to meetings and people would complain about the traffic. And I'm like, traffic? Are you kidding me? Have you been to Atlanta? Have you been to? And now all my wife does is complains about traffic in Fort Collins to me, and I'm complaining about it too. So it's not just her, but this city, and this is something that you probably language that you ought to be able to quickly rattle off the top of your head. That so what's the population of Littleton now, and what's the population going to be 25, 50, 100 years from now? In Fort Collins, it's not an art, it's a science. We know what the population growth will be. We know what the past growth trends have been. We know what our underlying zoning is. We know what infrastructure is available, and we know what past market trends have been. So I call that a science. And so the question is, we know that we're going to grow to a city of 255,000 people. We're not incentivizing that. We're not giving that away. We're not any of that. That's free market. And if we want to change that, when we got to start downzoning and we got to start not building the infrastructure and those sorts of things. But really, what I think we want to do is make sure we're very intentional about how that growth occurs. One of the things that I know about Fort Collins, and I'll talk here about plan and build, and I suspect that Littleton is the same way, but one of the things that we inherited in Fort Collins is that Fort Collins has always been a community that plans and then builds its plan. There's lots of cities that plan and put it on a shelf and don't build it. And again, I don't know what your community is, but there's also lots of communities that don't plan and just build. So what I want to say that one of a secret sauce in Fort Collins is that this town has been really, really intentional about planning and then building that plan. And then, of course, every 5 years, monitoring that plan and on an annual basis, actually, but then every 5 years doing a really hard check-in, and then every 10 years doing a complete review. And it just so happens that this past Tuesday night, our council adopted our 10-year review of city plan. And so it's really fresh for me. So when I stop talking and you want to talk about city plan and some of the ideas in Fort Collins, I'd be happy to do that. But I want to say that this plan and build thing is very important. And the planning part in Fort Collins is a deeply engaged, not 10 community leaders saying, here's what we'll do. It's a co-created plan. It's very collaborative. It's exhaustive. The last one we did 10 years ago took over 2 years to do. This one, because the council narrowed down the scope of it a bit, ended up doing it in about a year and a quarter. These involve thousands of people in our community. They involve public meetings and dialogues like this. They involve social media. They involve council hearings and planning commission gnashing of teeth and all those things. But I have a slide in here I was looking at last night that you'll see in the background. You'll see a crowd. On a kickoff of our city plan, we had several hundred people that were just there to kick off this planning process. So again, I didn't finish my thought on think big versus average, but again, that doesn't mean we want to be 500,000 people when I say think big. I mean, we want to be intentional about world-class municipal services. When you turn on your water in Fort Collins, we want you to have the best tasting and, from a microbiology standpoint, the best water on the planet. So the direction to our water utilities director is not, the city council and myself, we're not prescribing what world-class tasting water tastes like, but there are industry standards in around the world that say what that looks like. And so that's what we want you to aspire to. I'm not sure, and I love Fort Collins, I've been here forever. If the council came out and said, we're going to change our vision and we want to be average, I wouldn't be there. People don't, the people that I hang out with don't really want to be part of average. They want to be part of something that's going from here to here or here to here. I use the example of my marriage. I mean, Deb and I met in high school. We dated for 7 years. We've been married for 30 years. If I go home tonight and say to Deb, I think as a husband, I'm at the top of my game. I'm not going to get any better. Don't do that, because it's I haven't tried it actually, but she'd be like, you're a good husband and stuff, but we want you to get better. If I said to my son, Jake, as a dad, I'm at the top of my game, Jake would be like, Dad, he's studying business at Colorado State. Dad, you're a great dad and stuff, but I think you can get better. I want my yard to look better. I want to be a better neighbor. I want to be a better best friend. I want to be a better colleague to Terry. So why don't we want our cities to be better? And why aren't we intentional about that? And it's really important, because sometimes when I go to my industry conference, International City Managers Conference, I'll just use it as an example. Sometimes I can leave a classroom and I'm sitting out in the hallway, and what I hear two managers talking about is how miserable their councils are. Well, what if we change the dialogue? What if we start talking about the collaborative environment? And we do have, city managers have tough council members sometimes, and I'm sure in Littleton you don't, but in some communities we do. They're really, really hard, and people have to leave their jobs over that stuff. But what if the dialogue is changing about, instead of, do you hear what happened on Tuesday night? What if we're talking about driving excellence? This thing too, I'll talk a little bit more about excellence versus organic versus a framework. I have a colleague in the Denver metro area who's a city manager who believes that excellence happens organically in an organization and a community. That's not our model. We believe that through a framework, your chances of having excellent results are better than organically. So I'll elaborate on that a bit. And then this is a really important one for in a community like Fort Collins, and I suspect Littleton as well, that we have got to be very attentive to the nuances and the balance between the built and the natural environment. And this idea of triple bottom line sustainability, the economic and financial health of a community, the environmental health of a community, and the social health of a community, all three of those legs are critical. And so if you are thriving financially and thriving socially, but environmentally you're destroying the place, that's a problem, at least in our model. So always in the policy conversations and financial decisions, what's the impact from a triple bottom line standpoint? Really important. And so all of these things as well, we've got sort of resources available that help define these, I think, and help better clarify and maybe even give more definition to some of the things I'm talking about. So I'll be happy to provide those offline and to your city manager if that would be helpful. One of the other things I want to talk a little bit about is this idea of culture plus strategy equals results. As large organizations, we've got to be very intentional about the culture of our workforce. If you're striving to be world class and you have a suboptimal culture in your workforce, that's a problem. Again, if you have, and I'll talk more about that, but if you have a great culture in the organization but no strategy, you've got people who are having fun coming to work but not getting anything done. If you've got a really great strategy and a really bad culture, then you're not going to have people thriving in their work. And so that's what that's supposed to mean. And then this idea of co-creation, us versus them, I mentioned as managers and council members, or council members and council members, or community and city, or I just think this is intended to just stress the importance of collaboration and co-creation. And I've been in some cities that aren't intentional about a lot of these things, and I'm in one now that's very intentional about these things, and candidly that's why I've been there 23 years, because it's been a place that has been really rewarding professionally. It's been a place where we've been able to raise our kids, and it's a place that a community that, and by the way, I saw your survey results about the quality of life assessments from your resident survey. I mean, people love this place, and that's one of the things I wanted to share too. Is that, I'm coming from Fort Collins, where people say, they really, really like, or they really, really love their community. 90+% of our residents feel that way. That's here too. And so, maybe some of the things that I've shared is just, it's you sharpening your blade. It's not a complete overhaul. It's maybe there's something that's going on in Fort Collins that might be applicable here, or maybe and some of these statements have been really helpful for me too. Just your narrative is so important. What message are you sending to your community about the future of Littleton? And so, okay, now I'm going to go into my presentation. So this is just a graphic way to represent what I shared earlier, and that is, be intentional about your vision, align resources to that vision, be intentional about that. Remember the stop doing list, not just everything that we can do and all the new stuff, and then put systems in place that ensure that you're tracking and that that you're progressing. Back in 2008, when we had major turnaround, or major recession in Fort Collins, and this was a really critical time for us. We had gone through the first layoff in the history of the city. We had laid off about 150 people. It was terrible. I remember laying in bed shedding tears over some colleagues that lost their jobs, and I remember thinking, I never, ever, ever want to be part of an organization or leadership that has to do that. And so these systems matter to make sure, if you're a pilot, are there any pilots in the room? Because this is going to be perfect. There's two ways to fly an aircraft. Thank you. Would you mind putting those in for me? I'm a little distracted right now. There's two ways to fly an airplane. One is what's called VFR, Visual Flight Rules, and that is you're flying along, you're going along the Front Range, and it's a beautiful day. You see down there is I-25. Here's the foothills. Everything's good. Not like that, really, but and then there's what's called. I'll take that. Thank you. Then there's what's called IFR, which is Instrument Flight Rules, and that is if it's super cloudy, you can't see anything, but you can see your dashboard, and you know exactly where you're flying. I feel like 20-some years ago, when I came to the city of Fort Collins, and again, I don't want to be critical, I want to talk about our inheritance, but when we were flying along pre-2008, everything's good. It was blue skies. It was all good. We're flying. Everything's great. We didn't have an instrument panel. And it really quickly got really, really cloudy and really stormy. We knew that Pikes Peak was somewhere right up there, or Horsetooth Rock, whatever, or Longs Peak, whatever. We knew it was out there. But if you're flying in bad weather and you're using your visual, have no idea where you are. So that's the way that I describe our journey in moving from what I call a trust us local government to a data-driven, data-informed local government. These systems really matter a lot, that your dashboards, and I'll show you a slide in a minute. Who are you benchmarking against? What metrics are you using? How do you know that you're world class, or are you just average, best of average? And so that's a really important piece to all of this. This is when, by the way, in '08, when we started talking about closing swimming pools and eliminating services and laying people off, in these kinds of rooms, people were saying, whoa, wait a minute. When you put de-icing material down on your roads, how do we know you're putting the right amount down? Are you spending too much money? What about, do you have too many police officers? Are you paying employees too much benefits? They started, I say we had this trust us relationship. You give us your fees, taxes, fines, and charges. Trust us, we'll deliver a great local government. When we start changing that calculus a little bit, people started getting a little jiggy and started asking harder questions. That's why this instrument panel matters a lot. So what data are you using to determine whether or not you're getting closer to your vision? It's really important. So this is really the part that brings us to more data informed, moving away from trust us and more let me show you that we are spending the appropriate money on streets maintenance and on parks and on those sorts of things. This is a great one. I was on an airplane. Fast Company magazine is a great sort of millennial leadership kind of magazine. I'm not a millennial, but I like reading the magazine. I came across this page. This person, the question was, the best advice your mentor ever gave you. This guy had a really interesting and a profound one for me. This is part of my sort of, again, my own personal aha moment was, what's the one thing that you believe that no one else believes? That's the opportunity. And within a third of a second, my response was that local government can be great. So fast forward. So again, what's the one thing that I believe that no one else believes? And that's local government can be great. So fast forward about 3 months later, got off the plane. 3 months later, we had a company, a global company that has over 100 HR executives. They have about 100,000 employees. They have about 100 HR executives. Of all places, they came to Fort Collins and they wanted to sit down with New Belgium Brewery around culture and what's their secret sauce. They wanted to meet with Otterbox, who's a company in town that makes these cases. And then they came to the city. And so we had those executives in City Hall, and I was talking to them, and I asked them at the appropriate time, I said, how many of you believe that local government can be great? And these are people from all throughout the world. Not one person raised their hand. So now I'll bet if I asked how many of you believe local government can be great, I'll bet many of you raise your hand. I know your city manager will raise his hand. But I'll tell you what, did you raise your hand too? Or were you scratching your head? Okay. That's a really important question. And not one person in that room said that they would say yes. So what if and the thing that I'm really proud of in Fort Collins is I think if you were to ask our mayor and city council, I think if you were to ask our police chief, or if you were to ask the person who's pulling fiber optic cable, now we have 2,400 employees. Are there going to be some people who think, that's, yes. But I would say that one of the things I think that makes Fort Collins fairly unique is this high-level trusting relationship between the residents and the businesses and its local government. It's not perfect, but it's getting better, and it's up and to the right, and we're trying to go from here to here. So that, for me, was it's sort of the meaning of my whole career. I believe that local government can be great. And so then the question is, how do we operationalize that? Interesting. This is Peter Drucker. Probably most everyone knows who Peter Drucker is. He was sort of what they call him here, the man who invented management. I think probably 70s, 80s, 90s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. Peter Drucker wrote something like 50 some different books around leadership. He was the guru. Then came along this guy named Jim Collins, who's from Boulder, but isn't in Boulder now, but wrote some books called Good to Great, Great by Choice, Built to Last. What is it that differentiates between a good company and a great company? Jim Collins was a Stanford professor, did amazing things, best-selling authors, on and on, author on and on and on. And the way that Collins describes it is that Peter Drucker, who lived in Southern California, Jim Collins was in Stanford, up in Palo Alto, Northern California. Drucker invited him to his home in Southern California and says, and I've heard him say this. Actually, I've been in a meeting with 3 other people, including him, like this small, where he's used the Drucker sort of accent and the forceful voice. And what I remember is Jim Collins said that what Drucker said to him is essentially, Mr. Collins, you've done such amazing things in becoming a Stanford professor, and you've built wealth, and you're a best-selling author, and all these different things. And, we know about Good to Great and Built to Last. And I'm elaborating a little bit. I don't know that he said those exact words, but I think that you should spend less time on that and more time being useful to people. Exactly. So I'm thinking about last night, and this is one of the slides I changed, last night around vision clarity. I don't think that's just Drucker to Collins. I think, and as I'm thinking about the last third of my career, how do we be useful to people? And not just be about being a best-selling author and being so anyway, just wanted to share that. So here's our city plan. That was the room that was full, and it goes back here. But I can't remember how many people there, but it was were there. But it was an outstanding meeting. Vision clarity. I had mentioned earlier today earlier in this presentation. It's the mothership of planning. When we talk about vision clarity, the mothership of vision clarity is our city plan document, which was just adopted Tuesday night. Now, a lot of the implementing ordinances and pieces are going to come later. They're going to come over the next year or so. But the guiding principles and the philosophies and the strategic objectives, those things are adopted, and they're legit, and they are aspirational. They're not crazy, ridiculous, roll your eyes aspirational. They are aspirational. We talk about things like, what about autonomous vehicles? What about drones? What about what role is Uber and Lyft and going to play? And what about this issue of truly, when we talk about world class, we know what world class looks like for me and maybe our city council member and her partner, but what does world class look like to someone who's permanently disabled and in a wheelchair? What does world class look like to someone who's frankly living under a bridge in Fort Collins? So it's a big deal. These numbers are really critical. One of the things that I love about being a city manager in a town in Fort Collins specifically, as a city planner, I was always taught, think 25 years out. And I've been in Fort Collins 23 years. I'm through round 1. I've actually been there in that plan, and 25 years is not adequate. So if I get to be here another 25 years, probably not as city manager, but that's 50 years. A mayor of Doug, who I mentioned earlier, the Air Force strategic planner type, Doug said he was born and raised in Fort Collins. He remembers when there were no trees in Fort Collins. If you go downtown and you see the gorgeous trees in downtown, and they're 65, 70 years old. So the stuff that we're doing right now is going to have an impact way more than 25 years, but our plans focus on 25 years. The beautiful thing about my job is that we get to we have to be careful about it, because sometimes in your meetings, and if you talk about 100 years out, people are like, oh my gosh, here they go again. The city's really 100 years? How about talking about my utility bill next month? Okay, so we've got to be able to zoom in and zoom out. zooming way out, when you're in that process is really important, because if you're not doing it, no one is doing it. If you're not thinking about 100 years out, now I'm not saying your plan should be a 100-year plan. What I'm suggesting is that this should be very specific. This should be really thoughtful. This maybe should be really aspirational. And so what does it look like 100 years from now? I mean, pretty sure Fort Collins is going to be around 100 years from now. That's really only, two generations away. If you're not thinking about that, then I think nobody is. And so I love the fact that that not only our planning director, our police chief gets to talk about that stuff. Terry gets to talk about it. It's the person who owns the business downtown gets to talk about those sorts of things. All right, this is a really important one that I learned from a mentor of mine, the former director of Poudre Valley Health System. His name's Rulon Stacy. This speaks to the framework comment earlier a little bit too. We don't believe that excellence happens organically, or if it does, you got really lucky. So one of my favorite lines is that good, hardworking, capable, competent, dedicated people do not always guarantee great results. Good, hardworking, capable, competent, dedicated, passionate people, it does not mean that you're going to be excellent. And so the question is, then what? Well, we have a framework that we use, and it's the Malcolm Baldrige framework, which is during the Reagan administration, they developed a standard to recognize really high performance in manufacturing and in private. They were worried about us losing our competitiveness around the globe. And so they created this process to identify and really highlight best practices in business. And then this program is called the Malcolm Baldrige Performance Excellence Program, I think. Well, Poudre Valley Health System now merged with UC Health, but when Poudre Valley Health System was in northern Colorado, they went after this Baldrige process, this Baldrige framework, and became a Baldrige recipient. Rulon Stacy, who was the president of that system, was always saying to me, because he knew I was kind of geeking out in this space, that I liked it. I would go visit him in his conference room and be waiting for him, and I'd see his balanced scorecard up on his conference room or on his table. And I remember just seeing all the metrics, the dashboard this hospital had, and thinking, there's no way a city could ever do that. There's just no way. And then Rulon started taking me to meetings like Colorado Performance Excellence meetings, and now the organization's known as Rocky Mountain Performance Excellence. They're an organization that's really trying to help businesses excel through this Baldrige framework. And so Rulon was taking me he'd say, hey, come to this meeting, I want to show you. And we'd hear about businesses and how they were trying to go from here to here or from here to here. It was not about a trophy. It was about trying to get better at everything that they were doing. And then Rulon one time took me to the emergency department, and I met with some of the emergency room staff, and they talked about how process improvement was leading to actually saving lives. Like, there's no way cities can do this. There is no way. I mean, this is a political organization. There's no way. A hospital can do that. A manufacturing company can do that, but not a city. Another thing that Rulon told me about, and by the way, they became a Baldrige recipient, and then in 2017, the city of Fort Collins became a Baldrige recipient after 10 years, and we're the third city in the United States to achieve that. And it's remarkable, but again, it was never about the trophy. It was always about trying to go from here to here, and fundamentally believing that we just don't think that that happens organically. Like the city manager in the Metro Denver area that I debate with. He says, no, you get hardworking, capable, dedicated, competent, passionate people together and results will come. I don't buy that. I think you have to have some framework. So the Baldrige framework is really around leadership, strategy, voice of the customer, voice of your workforce, processes, data, I'm missing, and results. I'll just say it. So there's 7 very distinct categories. I botched up like 5 and 6. Terry, what's 5 and 6? Okay, I got it. What she said there was, you better hurry up and get through your presentation. So, by the way, category 7 results, that's, are you moving the needles? All this stuff that you're doing around leadership and strategy and listening to the customer and engaging your workforce and all this dashboard stuff, and bottom line is are you moving your needles in the right direction? And I would say up and to the right? But some of those are down, and great, thank you for the clarification. And all of that work, actually our needles started moving. And by the way, pre-Baldrige, the needles, we had good recognition, best place to retire, best place to, but we weren't systematically improving, and we were not on a journey of continuous improvement. We were on that sounds good, let's do that. That's a good thing. Let's do this, and so our priorities were going everywhere. Now I would say our priorities are laser-like focused, going to a particular dot or to provide world-class municipal services. This is an interesting slide, though. Rulon told me during that journey, when he first became the CEO of the hospital system, he came in and asked the departments about what they do and their productivity and so forth. And most of the places that he went, let's use the emergency room, went to the emergency room and they said, yeah, we're best in class and we're great. And so, he started snooping around a little bit and asking questions. Well, come to find out that every emergency, when you ask people when they leave the emergency room or you survey them, guess what? It's kind of like the fire department. If you ask, tell me about your fire department, everyone's going to say our fire department's great. I hope so in Littleton too, because if not, then you have a problem with your fire department. But when you do resident surveys, you will always have your fire department as one of the, in any city in America, one of the highest rated services. In Fort Collins, it also happens to be things like trails and open space. Trails and open space and fire sort of compete back and forth, which is phenomenal. But Rulon was saying, well, okay, so who are we benchmarking? How do we know we're great? Who are we benchmarking against? Well, they were benchmarking against Cheyenne General and Loveland and maybe a hospital in Littleton and so what they found out is that by the way, everyone who leaves the emergency room thinks highly of the emergency room. They'll give you really so they were riding on that. Yeah, great. 94% of our people leaving the emergency room are satisfied. Well, that's true in every hospital in the country. So Rulon started talking about, well, wait a minute, if we're talking about world class, why are we benchmarking against average? Why aren't we benchmarking against, and so my advice to you is be cognizant on who you're benchmarking against. And if you're not benchmarking, then I would suggest that you should think through that, because otherwise, how do you know that you're progressing? Now, this doesn't mean we're we're competing and, Bronco Raider kind of thing. What this means is we're going to go out and we're going to go visit the Mayo Clinic, Poudre Valley Health System. We're going to go visit the hospital system in Cleveland and Johns Hopkins, and we're going to go down to UCLA and we're going to go to Houston, and we're going to find out what world class looks like. And then that's going to be our North Arrow. It's not necessarily poo-pooing what's happening in Cheyenne and Loveland, but it's important to see who you're comparing yourself against. Because if you're comparing yourself against average, and if you're comfortable with being best in average, that's okay. That's not what Poudre Valley Health System taught us, and that's not what Fort Collins is trying to accomplish. So this is a great slide and a great example. This is in Amsterdam, and I'm the mayor and I and our traffic engineer and our bike coordinator had a chance last summer to go to Amsterdam. We were invited out there, and Fort Collins is considered one of the most bike-friendly communities in the United States. And it's a platinum-rated city, and it's just, we in Fort Collins, we talk about bikes, beers, and bands. And biking is a big, giant part of our community. So is beer. In a college town, you got to be careful about alcohol. So I like to say that it's the craft of brewing beer, not necessarily the quantity about beer. It's the quality of, and so it's the building of, and those sorts of things. And then bands, live music is an area that we're really trying to build on. So the four of us with a group of other cities went out to Amsterdam, and here's what I want to share, just an idea to sort of provoke some thinking about who you're benchmarking against. Fort Collins, one of the most bike-friendly cities in the country. We have about a 6 to 7% bike mode split in morning commutes. That means 6 to 7% of our people will ride their bikes to work. That is an amazing number given United States demographics and context. Amsterdam has over 50% bike mode split. Okay, and so this isn't the bike I rode, but I got to ride, the mayor and I and the traffic engineer and bike coordinator. And what it made me think about is, and this isn't, we could have easily gone to the other platinum cities, Davis, California, Portland, Oregon, Austin, Texas, Chicago of all places was one. I can't remember the other couple, but we went to Amsterdam. The trip was paid for by us, but it cost us about an additional $300 to $400 a ticket to go to Amsterdam versus to go to Portland, Oregon. And we don't we have sister cities, we have those sorts of things, but I guess what I want to just say is I've been thinking through this, and we've been trying to execute and operationalize on world class. If you aspire to be a world class biking community, then why not send people to Amsterdam for a couple $100 more? Hotels are the same, food's the same, and sit down with the planners who are truly world class. I'm not advocating everyone go out on junkets and those things, but and by the way, mayors and city managers and others and council members have to go to the editorial board and explain why they went to Amsterdam. But that trip's like $400 more than going to Portland. So, we could never think about benchmarking against Amsterdam. Well, what about this? Instead of Fort Collins having a mode split goal over the next 25 years of going 6 to 7% to 25%, which, by the way, we're not going to do it by visiting Portland and Davis. We're going to do it by finding out how they did it. So the importance of benchmarks matters a lot. All right, aligning resources, I've already spoken to it a little bit. People, in our case, 2,400 employees. If the city council tomorrow in Fort Collins, next Tuesday night at 6 o'clock said, we want our vision to be, we're going to build an army to protect this place. Okay, we can do it. You're clear. I mean, I wouldn't be the city manager, but you're clear what you want to do. We have 2,400 people, $1.4 billion, $100 million in capital. We can build a little mini army. So if you're clear about what you want to do, we can do that. So this idea of alignment of resources, make sure that you're intentional about how you're using your people. Leadership and community talent. This is our mayor, Wade Troxel. Really important. Is your leadership aligned to that vision, and have they crafted that, and do they own that, and does that come up every Tuesday night in your council meetings? Does it come up in your staff reports? Blah blah blah. I had mentioned capital. These are some crews that are building the broadband network, but $100 million a year in capital, streets, parks, not including broadband, water lines, electric conduit. Are you intentional about how you're leveraging that $100 million? Are you saying this is our vision, and we're going to use those dollars? And that's where I think a planning process really matters. If you don't have a plan, then you're going to just build whatever your traffic engineers think you should build, which I think is really important. But imagine if they're all working together and aligned. I've already shared this a little bit about plan and build, and again, I think I think given where you are right now, this deserves an exclamation point. Maybe I'll ask it as a question to provoke you all as a community. Is Littleton a community that plans and then builds its plan? Or are you a community that just builds? Or are you a community that plans and puts it on the shelf? And I don't know the answer, and I know there's body language in the room, and I'm going to move on. But I do want to say, that's been sort of an important part of our secret sauce. This is a really cool one. This is the slide that I mentioned earlier. This is for some of the internal city geeks, or maybe if you're part of a business, a larger organization. What we've talked about is, again, I don't think excellence happens accidentally. I think we talked about a framework, the Baldrige framework for us. It might not be the Baldrige framework. It might be something else for you. Internally, as a city organization, we're working really hard on our internal culture. Council is working really, really hard on our strategy. And so not only an average culture and an average strategy, because we don't desire average results, but let's focus on a great culture where people are thriving in their work, where they know what's expected of them, they have the right tools to do their job, they get praise when they do that, they're held accountable when they don't, their voice matters, they get to co-create, and your chances of great results. So we have what we call leadership system, and I'm going to start wrapping it up. And this is a little bit geeky, kind of nerdy, so bear with me. I'm going to zoom in real quickly. At the center of everything at the city are systems, and I would say if our Mayor Pro Tem were standing here making this presentation, vision, mission, and values matter a lot. So I'm going to focus on our internal vision, but do you have a vision statement? I know you do. Do you have vision, mission, values? Do you live those? Is it just a poster in the restroom? Is it, what? But our entire system circulates around our vision, mission, values. I don't want it to be lost. Provide world-class municipal services through operational excellence and a culture of innovation. So day in, day out, we're not going to say 70% of the time when you dial 911, we're going to be on your site in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Not 70% of the time, 100% of the time. Day in, day out, excellent, replicable, 24/7 results. Every time you call 911, you should always expect that standard to be met. Okay? And at the same time, we're asking folks to pop their head up and look for new, innovative ways to deal in their work. So operational excellence and a culture of innovation. So it's the 20-mile march every day, to use Colin's words. At the same time, we're asking you to look up and drive innovation in your workspace. So this leadership framework that we use is, it's at the top of it is vision clarity. Our community and city council are really who provides that through a significant amount of work, through our strategic plan. The alignment of resources is in what we have a system we call budgeting for outcomes. It's our resource allocation. How over this 2-year period, what do you do with these $1.4 billion and $100 million in capital? This system is really important to us. We align resources through our service plans, and then each individual coworker of mine, and including myself, I have individual goals. And then the systems, the creating systems, are our measurement, review, analysis, and improve process. What you'll notice is this is circular, and it's intended to be a plan, do, check, act. It's a cycle. We plan it, we do it, we check it, we revise it, and move forward again. And then do it, check, blah, blah, blah. These are some systems which we call key processes that I can tell you. This one, for example, says long-term city planning. That's city plan. I can tell you for these 15, 16 key processes, who owns it, when it's going to be updated, what resources are needed to do that. As I mentioned, long-term plan, that would be our director of our planning, development, transportation area, Lori Kadrich, She's responsible for annual reviews, for 5-year updates, and then for a 10-year overhaul. I can tell you on this one who's responsible. So it's really, these are key processes that if everything goes away or if things really implode, we know that these things have to get done. All the other stuff we can figure out. These things have to get done. This is more internal City Geek stuff, but these systems are the cadence. When we have a city council election, how we are intentional about onboarding those council members, when the cadence of how we do strategic planning, our budgeting for outcomes process, programs and initiatives, so forth. So that's not accidental either or organic. That's by design and can be changed anytime by council, but it hasn't been. It's withstood we have our entire system aligned around what we call 7 outcome areas. These are the big cojones of focus areas: culture, recreation, neighborhood livability and social health, economic health, environmental health, safe community transportation, and my favorite, high-performing government. Blood-sucking overhead, some people call it. But that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is how do internal administrative services like human resources, which is ultimately responsible for our future talent and our talent pipeline, how do we begin to talk about the expectation at a very high level of expectation, high performing government? So this is a really, for me, I can really geek out in this area, but these are critical to us. I'm gonna, I think, bypass this. I'll leave it up just for a sec. This is about our systems, strategic focus. We have things we call strategy maps. That's why I have so much gray hair, because of all this stuff. And Terry's, it's been an amazing journey. It really has. One of the slides that I want to say, this is the Baldrige Trophy that we received, but I'm not here to advocate for Baldrige. What I'm here to advocate for, or maybe provoke, is, are you an organic city? It's just going to kind of happen, or are you going to be intentional and use some sort of framework? That was never the destination. So this is a really beautiful prize along the way, but it was never the destination to become a Baldrige recipient. And that's it. So, okay. I got done I'm really shocked. And Terry, you should be really impressed with me. I got done 3 minutes longer than I thought I would. That was, I usually go 20 minutes over. So, as I said, my intention, and I think the reason why I was invited was just to share a little bit about our story. We don't have our entire act together. We've got so much improving to do, and like I said, I'm married to my best friend, and I think we have a phenomenal marriage. But if I think that it's the best it could ever be, and it's not going to get better, that's a really, really bad story for us. So I'd be happy to talk about density, bus rapid transit, internal culture, council manager relationship, whatever you want to talk about. I'll talk about my family all day long. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming all the way to Littleton so early in the morning and sharing these insights. You mentioned the triple bottom line earlier, and you mentioned all of these other wonderful measurements of excellence. And every one of them seems like a great road to go down with questions, but I was especially curious about the one that you mentioned that you called sustainability. Mm-hmm. And I wondered how you arrived at a definition of that, and then what has that turned into operationally and on a practical level?
That's a great question, and I'm probably most proud. One of the things I'm most proud of that the city's done over the last 2 decades is to try and operationalize sustainability. So that's a really hard thing to do. I think Fort Collins is the kind of community that the word sustainability is not an offensive thing. It's kind of like climate action planning, right? I have peers that I'll tell you, I have a peer in a city, in a state east of us that if he uses the word climate action planning or sustainability, he's probably not going to be a city manager there anymore. So it's not a safe environment to talk, because it's not a value for that community. I think that Fort Collins, I can go back at least 40 years and say Fort Collins has always been a community that's valued its environmental attributes and been very intentional about that. And one way I would demonstrate that is through voter-approved initiatives that allow the city to purchase open space. And we do that. And I'll get to your question, but I want to just share this as a backdrop. The open space program is really about protecting sensitive habitat. It's also about protecting view sheds. So it's not just because there's critters there that if they go away and we build on it, then they're never coming back, which is true. And so going back like 40 plus years, there's been an environmental ethic in our community, I think. And I think it's a really reasonable one that does balance that built-in natural environment. It's not a just buy every possible piece of property we can buy. We're very intentional about that. I think that the economic health of the city over the last 20 years or so has been a real focus area. And by the way, it's not let's go to Houston and Austin and San Francisco and Portland and steal companies and bring them to Fort Collins. That's not, we have, and we learned in the early years from you guys around economic gardening and some of the incubation stuff and some of that. So we're about helping businesses expand who are already here. We're about helping spin off innovation out of the university and out of these places. And attraction is not something that we'll go out and take a company and if a company is looking at relocating, then we'll work with them. I think the new space for us in this triple bottom line is around social health. And I think it relates to federal and state policy where it's really come down to the local level where now at 6 o'clock on Tuesday nights, we do have transients coming into city council meetings, or we do have people who are aren't that they have concerns about the equity. So I would say it's kind of a natural fit for us. Environmental awareness and consciousness and history, the economics of the city has been and then this new emerging sort of social equity thing. By the way, big cities have been dealing with social equity for forever. Small and medium-sized cities only really in the last 10 years. I mean, we've been our relationship in the social equity space has mostly been with police services, but it's become much more local and much more small town. And so we were trying to figure out how do these things sort of fit together. And as an organization, our organizational structure, it was in planning and it was in police and so we started out, and this is, we started out saying, let's have a point person that would be this triple bottom line sort of coordinator in the city. And let's have it be a dotted line relationship where, in other words, it's not a formal department. And the council drove a lot of this. And so we had that point person, and what we realized is that wasn't working for us. So we created a sustainability services area, like police, like transportation or planning, and we pulled together a number of the departments within the city. So economic health is in sustainability services, environmental health is in there, and then our social group. I think it's probably a group. We have a sustainability director. Her name's Jackie Kozak-Teal. She's amazing. We have a vision. I think the department is probably 40, 50 people that their role is to be attentive to the sustainability of the city. And so now the way that gets then operationalized is when council's dealing with a policy matter or a budget decision, we're looking at it through the lens of this triple bottom line. So all those decisions come through, and it sounds onerous and it's probably could feel bureaucratic, but it's a really refined sort of filter that we go through. So I would say it was sort of embedded in our history a little bit originally starting in environmental consciousness and awareness, and then concerned about the health of the city financially, and then this social equity thing. And then we tried to do it in a disaggregated kind of way in our organization. Wasn't working, and so then we centralized and said, if it's a priority for us, we need to align resources to that priority, and that's where sustainability services came from. And I would love to get you in touch if that's a topic interest area for you. I'd love to get you in touch with people. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Sorry, I'll make my answer a lot quicker than that one.
That's all right. I was astounded to hear how you're doing broadband services in
Yeah.
Fort Collins. Now, how is that paid for? Will each citizen pay for that through their property taxes or by a bill?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, each citizen won't pay for it. Citizens who subscribe to it will pay for it. So our business plan, as I mentioned, in about 34 months, we'll have fiber running by every property in the community, commercial and residential. And again, this was a voter-approved initiative back in November. The business model calls for if we need a 26 to 28% subscribership to have a full return on our investment. So that system will be paid back in about 12 to 14 years, I think. So so general taxpayer will not pay it unless it will not be paying for it. It's the person who subscribed to that service. We think that 26% subscriber rate is really, really low. In other cities like Longmont, Chattanooga, Wilson, North Carolina, other benchmark cities that we've looked at. And by the way, if you're interested in this topic, Longmont is a global leader in this space. Longmont has built a municipal broadband utility, and they have over 50% subscriber rate. And I think that, the three differentiators for us, and Chattanooga, I believe, is in the 80% subscriber rate, and in Wilson, it's high as well. We did not go into this thinking we were going to build our own broadband utility. We felt like that was a private model, and that's what they do. I think what we're thinking is going to differentiate us is that you'll be able to buy true gigabyte upload, download speeds, what's called symmetrical gigabyte service. We think that our pricing is going to be as competitive or more competitive than CenturyLink and Comcast. And we also think that we might be able to beat them in customer service. We've spent a lot of time thinking about that, and a lot of time, obviously, so have many on the globe. And I'd be happy to talk more about some of our findings, but I think that's coming, and we think that this adds value to that system rather than becomes a stranded investment. So I'd be happy to talk more about it. But there are cities who are doing this now, not many. I refer you to Longmont and Chattanooga for sure, and Wilson. Frankly, what happened was we had many discussions with the incumbents, the providers in Fort Collins, and frankly, we see broadband as basic infrastructure, not a nice to have, especially looking out over the next more than 18 months out. And when we started talking about their investment in in Fort Collins, there really was no plan. And we got really worried about that and had many, many community conversations and decided to go in that space. But no, my next door neighbor who chooses not to buy Connection, which is the brand name, will not pay for it. Theoretically, some critics in the community will say that yes, your neighbor will pay for it if it goes belly up. And if it does go belly up, if it failed, which there is zero room for failure on this thing, then the electric ratepayer, which we're electric utility, is ultimately the where the risk comes in. So yeah. Any other? Yeah.
Can government be too large?
Oh, look, it's 9:00. We're done.
Can government be too large?
Sorry.
And what is the optimum size of government if it can't be too large? Thank you.
Well, I don't think there's a formula. It's a good question, and I think I probably understand the basis for it. I would say that what I love about local government is that we get to define what that looks like. We don't necessarily get to define what the state government looks like, and we don't get to define what the federal government looks like. But the great news that if you think it's too big, or if you think it's too bureaucratic, or if you think, then the great news is you get to have coffee with your council member, probably within a week of asking, I imagine, or maybe a month of asking, or you get to come down on a Tuesday night and share that. So I don't. My direct response to that is I think it really depends on what you've established as your community blueprint. For example, in some towns, a 3-foot bike lane is perfectly adequate. In a town that's trying to drive 25% bike mode split, let's say, a 10-foot bike lane is more adequate. That additional 7 feet of asphalt is going to cost more in capital and more in maintenance, and it's going to require more people and more resources. I will say this, and I'll probably offend a lot of my counterparts even around the state. One of the things that I love about Tabor is that the voters get to decide whether or not you increase your taxes for a higher level of service. And just a couple weeks ago, we asked our voters for renewal of a tax that sunsetted after 10 years, and they approved all but a quarter cent of it to be now continued in perpetuity. And that quarter cent we're going to have expire in 10 years. So what I love about it is with Tabor, the voters ultimately decide what resourcing level. So I think it totally depends on the vision of the city. I think that there are cheaper ways of doing it than Fort Collins. Again, and I refer you to the 3-foot versus 10-foot bike lane. We have that debate, and it's not always a 7-0 vote on council, and it's not always 100% in the community. But I think. So that's, I guess, how I would answer, recognizing it's 9 o'clock. Thank you for this. This is therapy for me to be able to share our story. So I'm really grateful for that. And I also just know, your city manager, your mayor and council. It's hard stuff, but it's also what a privilege it is to be part of co-creating a community. And this is an amazing thing that you have this speaker series. Not every city in Colorado has it. In fact, very, very few do. So kudos to you guys for doing that. So thank you for having us.